Mummies aren't rare. We just ate them all. Is that really true? Did people actually eat mummies? Well, yes, but that isn't the only thing people did with these human raisins. Sit back and make a cup of tea with me. Just try not to spit it out when you hear about the disgusting things people once did with mummies. Mummies were once a highly valued commodity in a few different sectors. So, first of all, why do we even call them mummies? The word mummy has its origins in the translation error. People of old widely used and praised a substance called bitumen. You may know it generally as asphalt. This bitumen came from Western Asia and was referred to in Arabic as mamiya. Mamiya bitumen was often marketed as a panacea and was highly sought after. But a problem arose during the 12th century when people mistook the black resinous substance that covers mummies' bodies as the same medicinal bitumen they had already been using. Hence, the term mummy soon came to describe the embalmed corpses themselves. When there was a shortage of this magic asphalt, medicine peddlers needed a new supply to fuel the demand. At the time, there was an abundance of mummies in Egypt. Once people connected the dots, a booming trade between Europe and Egypt arose. People ground the bodies into a powder and consumed it just as they would have used the original stuff. Thing is, though, there are no proven benefits of eating bitumen. Matter of fact, there are poisons and carcinogens contained in this material. Anyways, people weren't eating mummy jerky as a tasty snack. They thought of it as a medicinal thing. It was only during the Renaissance period that scholars realized their mistake. Mummy powder was not the same as the highly prized mamiya bitumen. They had been cannibalizing these corpses for no good reason, really. But that didn't stop people from using these desiccated bodies for other purposes. Artists used to love ground up mummy flesh. It made for an excellent pigment with specific properties. It produced a lovely brown color that could be used by artists to create shadows. Due to its transparent nature, artists used it right on top of other paints like a glaze. It was like the multiply layer mode of their day, if you catch my drift. It was literally called mummy brown. So I kind of find it hard to believe that they didn't know. They just loved it too much to give it up. Mummy brown had its heyday during the 18th and 19th centuries. Over time, however, mummy supplies ran dry, spiking the price of this pigment. Fakes made of freshly mummified criminals began to infiltrate the market. Even then, artists can be fickle though, and its popularity began to die off in the early 1900s, especially when many artists claim they just figured out where it came from. It's probably for the best that you can no longer buy this pigment. So it's told Egyptian railroad men would use mummies as fuel to run their boilers. Is this actually true? This story comes from a text written by Mark Twain. It's just a story. Twain himself, in the very same text, The Innocents Abroad, states, "Stated to me for a fact. I only tell it as I got it. I'm willing to believe it. I can believe anything." Take that for what you will. But I highly doubt that mummies made for an efficient fuel. During the 1850s, the United States was producing more newspapers than any other country, so much so that paper was in short supply. The paper made at the time commonly used cotton fibers, usually derived from old pieces of fabric. Italy, being one of the United States' major suppliers, started selling its fabric to other countries, namely England. This was a real problem. How were Americans supposed to solve their morning crossword and read up on a Florida man if there were no materials to make the paper? Some newspapers were even printing their stories on the backs of old, already used newspapers. They needed a new supply for paper-making material, desperately. There was a man named Isaiah Deck. He was what one would call a Renaissance man, with a diverse set of interests. In his travels, he considered the viability of bananas, aloe, and some other grasses for papermaking. but none of them were very conducive to this process. During one of Deck's excursions to Egypt, he noticed the abundance of mummies. Noticing a high-quality fabric being used to wrap these mummies, he got to thinking. Assuming that Egyptians of old had been mummifying their dead for about 2,000 years, and a population of 8 million people consistently through that time, all of which having the average lifespan of 30 years, that would leave nearly 500 million mummies ripe for the picking. This isn't even considering the vast amount of mummified animals laid to rest with their owners. With many of these bodies wrapped in up to 30 pounds of the fine cloth, and Americans using about 15 pounds each per year, Deck estimated that these mummies could supply the United States paper industry for 14 years, negating the need for material from Europe. So, did people of the time use mummies for paper? The evidence isn't very conclusive. There aren't any verifiable sources, and even if there were records of these mummy-derived rags, they wouldn't have been declared as mummy-sourced. They would have just been scraps of fabric imported from Egypt. If we tried to DNA test paper suspected of mummy origins, all the test would conclude is the material had once been in contact with a human being. Since fabric was the material of choice, most of the tests would tell us just that. The jury's still out on this one, so I can't tell you they didn't use mummies for paper. You might enjoy watching people unbox things on the internet. Everyone has watched a YouTube unboxing at least once, either from sheer boredom, or maybe you already bought the product and for some reason want to see it unboxed and reviewed while you impatiently wait for it to arrive. Either way, some things don't change. People love unboxings, be it a corpse or that new iPhone. Well, I guess some things change. Folks generally don't crowd around dead bodies in public executions these days. Entrepreneurs would buy up mummies for the sole purpose of unraveling them for a crowd. There are also many traveling exhibits showcasing these ancient bodies. Damn, they must have been pretty bored. Probably the most well-named surrounding the hoarding and unboxing of mummies is Thomas Pettigrew. During his time in the Victorian period of England, Egyptology was all the rage. Many were fascinated with the macabre history of these bodies and even wanted one, or more, for themselves. Imagine inviting someone into your home, and your best conversation piece was a dead body. Anyways, Pettigrew was a doctor who had an obsession with anatomy and mummies. He published England's first book on Egyptology, The History of Egyptian Mummies. This book contained detailed drawings and accounts of his finding through dissecting countless mummies. There are also stories of patients in hospitals that Pettigrew inhabited, checking themselves out when they thought they were close to death. They did this to avoid being dissected by Pettigrew upon death. What a stand-up guy. One of his favorite party tricks was the unraveling of a mummy. An acquaintance of his by the name of Alexander Hamilton was so obsessed with mummies that he wanted to become one himself. Enamored by Pettigrew's work, he arranged for Pettigrew to mummify his own corpse upon death. Welp, his wish came true. His wish to become a mummy was fully realized when he died in 1852. Pettigrew mummified Hamilton's corpse, and the resulting Hamel mummy was placed in a real Egyptian sarcophagus that he had purchased in France. His body still remains in the Egyptian sarcophagus to this day. Hopefully Pettigrew did a good job, I guess. Others were satisfied with just owning the mummies rather than becoming the mummy. Luckily, as time progressed, the idea of preserving ancient culture rather than destroying and profiting off of it came into prominence. So, are mummies rare today? Is it because of the countless unboxings and cannibalizations of these corpses? Are most of our mummies now just reduced to a thin layer of paint on a canvas? Well, yes. They are rare because of the thriving industry they supported back then. People ground them up, ate their flesh, painted with their dust, and showcased their bodies. I can only imagine the Egyptians would be turning in their graves at this fact, but alas, they cannot. We ate them all.